Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Production House. I am your host, Corinne Joseph. Today, I wanted to bring on a very special guest. His name is Steve Tulli, and he has a few qualifiers that I wanted to make sure we all got acquainted with before you got to see him. He is the tech engineering and science teacher at Air Shirley Regional High School. He is the co-advisor for the leadership program, same institution, and the voice of the Panthers, primarily during the football season. So, Mr. Tulli, welcome.
Thank you, Corinne. It's great to be here. It's an honor.
I should also mention that even though I'm going to refer to him as Mr. Tulli, he is, for me, my former high school teacher. So that's why I'll be using that honorific throughout the program. But yes, he is by most people known as Steve.
Thank you.
So the reason I brought you onto this program is because the film, as this program goes, the purpose is to talk about stories and their importance and how they infect and empower us on an individual level.
Okay.
So in your case, the story that you would introduce to me and the rest of the students on a regular basis was the film Son of a Woman, starring Al Pacino, that came out back in 1992. For those that don't know, the film is directed by Martin Brest. Not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Mm-hmm. It's around two main characters. We have Charlie Sims, and I have the note right here. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade.
Yes.
So Charlie Sims, he is a student at the Baird School. Mm-hmm. He doesn't come from a lot of money, and so he is seeking to make a few $100 so that he can go home for Christmas.
That's right, back to Oregon. There
are a few points in the story I want to talk about, but before we get there, Mr. Tulli, I want to know, tell us the reason why the film Son of a Woman stands out to you.
Well, the Son of a Woman stands out because it really exemplifies the core values that the U.S. Army follows. They use the acronym leadership, LDRSHIP, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and your personal courage. So throughout the movie, you see these core values integrated into the film, implemented in how Frank Slade, Colonel Frank Slade, works with Charlie, and how he tries to develop him into becoming a young man. So a big piece of the film is that Charlie is trying to get back to Oregon to see his parents for Christmas break, and this is happening during the Thanksgiving break, that he is going to take care of Frank Slade. Frank Slade, former U.S. Colonel, like you said, in the Army, who became blind through a training injury. And he served in a number of roles in the government. One of them was he was Johnson's aide back in the late 60s. They talk about that every now and then through the film. But it's a very important film because it really shows you how core values can be applied into everyone's life on a daily basis, whether you're in the military or you're not.
So let's start from the beginning. So for me, what I noticed is that even though the story tends to fall between Frank Slade and Charlie Sims, to me, I found that it's like, even though Charlie Sims is the main character, he's the protagonist that we're following, mm-hmm. It seems like it's more like Frank Slade's story.
In a way, yes. They talk about, it goes back and forth. First, they have a very, very oppositional relationship at first when Charlie goes to visit Frank at his niece's house. The niece and her husband and the two kids have a house that's probably right near the Baird School, the fictitious school that they're mentioning in New Hampshire. It's a private school. And so Charlie goes to visit there because he sees an ad on the student bulletin board. If you want to make $100 or whatever it is, $200 for the weekend to take care of an elderly person. But when he gets there, he gets more than what he's bargained for because Frank tells him exactly how it is, tells it like it is, right? And he kind of leaves a few things out that he wants to go to to the Big Apple for the weekend, and he actually was trying to kill himself at that point because he thought his life was worthless because he became blind and he became quite depressed and didn't feel like his life was worth living anymore because he wasn't making an impact with anybody. But he soon saw that he was making an impact with Charlie, and so I'll wait until that point there. But a big piece to back up, you were talking about why it's so important, is that when I started the leadership program at Air High School, this is back in the fall of 2004, I subconsciously didn't even realize that I was using a lot of these core values. My dad was in the Army in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle for Central Europe, and the Rhineland campaign. And so he saw a lot of combat and so on, and he really instilled with me a great pride for the country and honor and respect of veterans. So I was around veterans for a long time growing up, and I have the utmost respect for them. So seeing that movie kind of brought that back too as well. And then when I started doing the leadership program as a non-recruiting program at Air Shirley Regional High School, that was Air High School, then became a region. We do a lot of things to help out the areas of Air and Shirley, and one of them is the Veterans Day program, which you've been involved with, where we have the veterans come in, we have a breakfast for them and so on to give them the honor and the respect that they so greatly deserve. So that's the idea of that. And so a lot of these core values that you see played out in the movie, we implement them in our program.
As you had said earlier, that both Frank and Charlie have a bit of because as Charlie told Frank's niece, he meets with Frank, then Frank gives him a bit of a speech, and then Charlie goes back to the house, talks to the niece, and he's like, I don't think I passed the interview. And she's like, no, like you didn't, no, like you did fine, like you're the only one who showed up. And and Charlie's like, I guess I'll take the job.
And she wanted to get away because it was the first time that she was able to get away with her husband and the kids because she was taking care of Frank,
right?
Who we later on see his brother lives elsewhere, right?
Yes.
He goes to visit him by surprise for the Thanksgiving dinner, and that is the father of the niece. So,
right.
so we later on see that. Back up a little bit too about how I run my classroom and how I run a lot of the organizations that I've been involved with, whether it be the Teachers Union, which I was involved with for 10 years. I was the president, and I ran the CBC. I was a faculty advisor for that with you guys, the Communication Broadcasting Club, through Air Public Access Corporation. So the Communication Broadcasting Club, we did a lot of good activities and a lot of these core values. In fact, all of them I have applied throughout those programs. So it really is a foundation for me. No pun intended, because I teach tech engineering, but it really is a foundation for me about where I base my moral compass on and how I go to deliver my program with the students. And you as a student, you've known that's how we do it. And lead by example. So if I'm not following the core values myself, how do I expect my students to be able to follow?
So one thing I noticed is that, like, as you have said that Frank is, he's planning to go to New York to kill himself.
Right. Which Charlie doesn't know yet.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. So, you're not supposed to know about that part yet. So just so act surprised when you see it. But it does get heavily alluded to because once Charlie and Frank get there, Frank tells Charlie his plan. He's going to. I know he said he wants to make love to a beautiful woman.
A small list of pleasures.
And
which was have an agreeable meal.
Yeah. And then I know and then a couple other things happened. At the very end, he said he's going to blow his brains out.
While they were in New York. Now, what happened was during the scenes of all these, Frank is getting fitted for a suit, and there's a woman that's Charlie's same age. About there. She's going to college and she's working on the weekends to fit suits for people. And so he's getting a brand new suit being fitted for him. Charlie gets a phone call, and the phone call that he got was from one of his classmates who, as you say quite eloquently, that Charlie is a student that does not have a lot of money. He's there on a scholarship, where these other people are like trust fund babies, right? and their legacy, so they get taken care of, right? Well, there was a part in the movie, right at the very beginning, that the librarian, Mrs. Hunsucker, she saw boys out there with a ladder, and what happened was that they put the paint inside a balloon, and when Mr. Trask, the headmaster, went to go get it, to take it down, it went all over his car, right? And so he had a beautiful car that he had on there, and it was a Jaguar. And he thought that Charlie had done it because the other kids there kind of squealed, behind the scenes on it, but they weren't really sure if he did it or he didn't, right? But they kind of had an idea that he may have been involved. They were trying to put the squeeze on him and try to have him say it under duress, and try to put the pressure on him to say who did it. And he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to say who did or who didn't do it because he didn't feel like it was his place to tattle. But he was grappling with this thing all weekend long. And Frank Slade, being a lieutenant colonel and leading people, like he said in the movie, he could kind of sense that Charlie was all alone in this, and he could sense that something wasn't right, and that he wanted to follow those core values to go to support him. So that was the first piece of that time that he heard Charlie had a problem. Another time was when he was in the limousine, and he got a phone call, and George was up in Sugarloaf, up in Maine, or up into Vermont, wherever they were, for Thanksgiving, and he was talking about the moves, so to speak, talking about, we just keep it as status quo, and Mr. Trask won't know what's happened, and we don't go to rat out each other. And so these were the things that were happening throughout those 2 days that he was with Mr. Slade.
I wanted to kind of jump back a bit. So Mr. Trask, who was the headmaster of the Baird School, he wasn't just putting the squeeze on Charlie just so that he found out who was responsible for ruining his car. He also bribed Charlie that I can get you into Harvard,
right?
Like you'll be all set, like full ride scholarship. And when I watched that scene, I'm like, because he talks to not just Charlie, he talks to Charlie and George Willis Jr.
George Willis Jr. must have a George Willis Sr.
Yes.
as Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade says throughout the movie.
So, so he talks to both of them, and he's kind of like, he kind of comes off as, I guess, like your average everyday headmaster. Mm-hmm. But then when he gets Charlie alone, he's like, I can get you into Harvard, full ride scholarship. So not only that scene, but we also get it similarly again at the end when he talks to Charlie again with the entire student body watching, right, which we'll get to later on.
And the disciplinary board was there.
Even though Mr. Trask is the antagonist, I realized Mr. Trask is like, because he says two things. One, well, even though there's the disciplinary committee behind him at the end, he's running the whole show. Everything that he says and does is for the sake of his ego.
And he's presiding over he's using it, as you say, Corinne, as a front, because he's using it as a cover for the school's values and character, right, about what they stand for, but it really is about him. He wants to know who did this to his car because he takes it as a personal attack on himself that his car got damaged, right?
Right. I kind of understood where Charlie was coming from. It's like, one, he's not, as you said, he's not going to rat out the other students because it's not really his place. And two, he doesn't want to rat them out just so he can get into Harvard, because he knows what that's going to do to his conscience later on.
But the thing is that Al Pacino, who plays Frank Slade, didn't know that Charlie was having these things. He feels that Charlie may be in doubt and may go along with it, right, and rat them out. And that's why he was saying through the movie, as you'll see, that he says, once you sing as a bird, you sing forever. You'll never go back. So once you do that, you're going to sell out, and that is even worse than doing the crime yourself, or whatever the case was that they did, pouring the paint onto the car, or putting into the balloon that went into the car.
At first, I kind of thought that was weird, because even after Charlie tells Frank, hey, this is the this is the situation. It's like the headmaster, bribed me for a scholarship. Frank is like, well, take the bribe. And I'm like, but why?
He was challenging him. Well, what one could say that he was challenging him about that. That's what I got from it anyway, that he was challenging him to see what he was going to do. Was he going to stand up and confront that? Or was he going to do, like he says, are you going to sing like everybody else? And once you sing, you've sung for the rest of your life because you're no good anymore, because you're just like everybody else. So he was trying to bring those core values in a way, without saying LVRSHAP. He was trying to show him how those core values go to apply. Another thing that he was showing him too was that even though his sight was no longer there because he had the training accident, that he could also dance the tango and drive the Ferrari, right? He also showed him that as well, that it's not, there are things that you see without your sight, right? And a lot of those things that you can see without your sight is the smell of perfume from a woman that might be nearby. So that's why they call it the scent of a woman, right? Although a lot of people may say, why do they call it that for? And really not, the core values of life. Because that's what he was actually showing him, right? How to become an adult male, man, and how to be a gentleman, as he was showing him in that movie. But he was doing it in his own way. So that's how the Son of a Woman comes out, because he was showing him that there are things you can see without sight.
To go back to where Frank was telling Charlie, oh, just sing, just take the bribe. When I got to that part, I thought, because I didn't think Frank and Charlie had like bonded just yet. Mm-hmm. So I just took it as Frank he doesn't really know Charlie that well. So he's like I guess it's just like a saying that he might say to like anyone he doesn't know. Well, just take the bribe, regardless of the individuals that he's interacting with, because he's getting hit on all sides. He's not just getting hit. He's not just being like shut out by his peers, even though there's no like direct bullying that's happening at the school with him specifically. He doesn't have any like immediate friends that we, the audience, are aware of. Mm-hmm. He's not really getting much support from any teachers. Nope. And he even and when he talks about his home life, he says that, well, his biological father had left, and it's him, his mom, and his stepdad, and and to quote the movie.
Well, there are some vulgarities that are in the movie that
yes.
people may not wish to see, whatever, but they're not done in a negative way on it.
Right.
They're just done it as a passing kind of thing on it. And standards as the movies are made for today, that's really like rated G for what it is, for maybe PG-13, I would say.
Yeah.
Right?
So Charlie.
I think that's what it is rated PG-13. Right?
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So so Charlie does not think very highly of his stepfather, just to keep it, clean language.
Yes. For FCC guidelines, as I would teach you guys in broadcast journalism, right? FCC guidelines permit me from saying this, right? That's okay.
Because of that, because he and even then with Frank Slade, him and Charlie haven't quite bonded yet. So Charlie, I thought Charlie was very mature for his age, because I think a few times in the film, it's brought up that, or no, when they go to buy the Ferrari, it's brought up that he's 17, and I'm like, this kid's 17, yeah. Just as a quick aside, most of the boys that I went to high school with, and even my first few years in university, I mean, granted, I don't know what their personal lives were like.
Well, you got to think too, and that's a good point to make, Corinne, but you got to think too that Charlie, look what he's gone through up to that point in time, right? Scholarship student, so he probably had to work super hard in school to get the scholarship when he was in Oregon, because that's how the plot talks about. And not only that, but he had his father that had nothing to do with him, his biological father, and the stepfather, right? He kind of had to do a lot of things for his mother. And for the mom and pop store, it came out to be there was a mom and pop store. And as Frank Slade says in the movie, the mom but no the pop, but no pop, right? Because the pop left. So it's the step pop. basically. But anyway, so think of what Charlie had to go through to where he is now, right? He plays football for the Bears school, and how we know about that is because during the dinner scene that he's at his brother's house, that they surprised him, with their visit. They were talking about him being a running back or a halfback for the Bears school for football, right? And kind of during that time frame, Charlie showed Frank his loyalty towards Frank, because Frank's nephew kind of ragged on Frank about how he lost his eyesight and how he was kind of a jerk, before he had the training incident, an accident, and afterwards, right? And Charlie says, don't be rough on him because he was a war veteran, right? And so and then the nephew was rude to Frank again, and Frank told him, don't call him Chucky, call him Charlie or Charles. And he warned him the first time, then he did it again, and then he did a Ranger's chokehold on him.
Right.
Which at that scene ended, them leaving, and kind of like embarrassment for Frank, because Frank had lost it, right? And he told his older brother, that he's no good, meaning that Frank is no good. And that was the point where he felt even more depressed about things and so on. And that was what led to him to take out his sidearm after he got all dressed up, and Charlie intervened at the hotel.
Well, before that, they prior to that, he has Charlie he takes the whole gun apart, and he has Charlie time him on like how fast he could put it together, and he's like time me, like how well did I do, and he's like, and Charlie's like, about 30 seconds, and Frank's like, okay, got to be able to do it in 25.
Right.
Got to be able to put together a 45 and 25. And then after that, it's been a couple days since I watched the movie, but I think I want to say I have the time frame right, where he's depressed. Like he's obviously no. Frank goes to see this woman because they bring up he wants to. He requests an escort like twice, and I'm
Manny,
at first.
What do you know about the escort scene?
I don't know anything.
and Manny's the driver. He's the the limousine driver that took them from New Hampshire, from the niece's residence, right, all the way down to the Big Apple, down to NYC, and they brought him back to New Hampshire as well.
Well, not all the way, because they definitely took a flight down.
They took a flight from Boston, from Logan, right, down to New York. Yes, that is true, right. They drove him back, but down there they got the cab. I mean, they got the limousine.
Right. I like how tastefully it's done, because at first when the escort because the escort thing is brought up twice, and I'm like, what does this have to do with the plot? But they keep it very tasteful, because once Frank goes inside the hotel or building or wherever he goes to meet her, we stay with Charlie. Like, we don't see what's going on.
And that's when Charlie got the phone call again from George about what was happening.
Actually, he makes the situation. Phone. He calls George, because he.
Right, he calls him, right.
And he's like, oh, does this thing, because for reference, it's a.
Pre-cell phone days.
Yeah, it's a car phone.
Yeah.
It's a car phone.
From the limousine.
Yes.
From
so
Manny,
he asked the driver, hey, does this thing do long range? He's like, yeah, have at it. So, and that's when Charlie finds out that George, that George Willis said he's going to talk to his dad.
Who's George Willis Sr.
George Willis Sr.
A graduate of the 1950s from there. Yeah.
Who's going to try and get them off the hook. And I want to get back to George Willis and his dad in a minute, but I just wanted to say, I like that scene, how tastefully it was done, because we're just sitting with Charlie for however long, and then Frank comes back, and then we cut to the next morning afternoon. And so Charlie goes to check in on Frank, and you can tell that he's very depressed. And
that was one of the only scenes, too, that Frank didn't need assistance when he came out of the building after having the interlude with the woman, right?
Right.
He didn't need to have Charlie's assistance, because Charlie was in the car talking to George after he called, right? So then, all right, so now you fast forward to the next day now.
So Frank is clearly depressed, and I think this is a part where I thought Charlie was he used some good intuition.
Yes.
Because when they were on the plane, Frank said that he was talking about how amazing women are, but a very close second was a Ferrari.
Right.
And Charlie tells him, you want to go for a ride? And even though he doesn't directly say, a Ferrari, he says, do you want to go for a ride? And that kind of spurs Frank into action. And they go down to the Ferrari dealership.
Yeah.
And that entire back and forth with Frank and the dealer, it was like,
Right.
like what was it? Like he was like, Frank was like, well, one, I thought it was funny that Frank referred to Charlie as his son. I know it's not an uncommon thing for people who are unrelated. Yeah, that's my offspring, even though they're not related by
Right.
blood. The way Frank and the dealer were talking, it was, well, the first thing I didn't necessarily understand was that the dealer referred to himself as, well, he says, the people at the office refer to me as the gray ghost.
Right, because he was at one time a really, really young, right? Had his hair nice, and he still was very well put together with a nice suit and everything on, right? And his glasses and so on. He looked very dignified. But he was able to sell a lot of those cars to go out, the Ferraris. And he's saying now a lot of times that they're not being out there, and they just have me around here to, as like a fixture. So he himself felt like he was not being worth anything either, right? The Ferrari dealer. And then Frank told him, he says, well, I've been around too, and I feel, like I am older too as well, and I have some money here to give you for a deposit, this, that, and the other. And he says, I'd like to have a chance to drive the Ferrari. He could identify with that because he felt the same way, the dealer, the auto dealer.
I guess the part I maybe it just slipped my mind or something, but I guess how was he able to convince the dealer to let them deposit? Because well, obviously the guy, he already knows that Charlie is like 7, he's underage, he can't
Right.
sell it to a kid. But doesn't he already know that Frank's blind?
He does, but he said that Charlie will drive it, and he says, and he'll drive it so well that you can actually have an egg on it and it won't break, or something like that. He said to him, right? He could drive it so smooth that you could have an egg on it and it won't fall. So he says, I'll take responsibility for this, that, and the other, and he says, and you can have, you could go get, a bottle of champagne. I'm going to give you a case of champagne. You can have it with your leftover turkey, because it was the previous day was
Thanksgiving.
Was Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, and then at the very end, he's like, what he gives him like what, 2,000 in cash?
Yeah. He gives them cash to have that, and then when they take the Ferrari out, and they let it out, right?
Yeah.
As Frank says, they get pulled over by the police officer who used to be in the Coast Guard.
Yeah, the Coast Guard.
And Frank kind of gives him a jab, and he goes, "Oh Lord," because he thought that he was Army. He goes, "No, Coast Guard." He goes, "Oh Lord," like that, right? So that's kind of like a way too that a lot of they have a friendly rivalry.
Yeah, like
amongst the armed forces. So he was kind of like giving him a hard time, right? And that's why Gore, who is the police officer, joked and he laughed. He goes, "Your father is looking great, Charlie, but get this rig back in there right now," right? So he let him off.
So it's right after they get the car, so like they're in the middle of the city, and then they go down like a side street. I thought that that scene by itself is it's not necessarily an action scene in and of itself, but it was like kind of because you have to think, you have an elderly blind man driving a very expensive fast car.
But again, there are things in the movie, as you can see, that he could sense.
Yes.
In other words, to say that there are things that you see that you don't necessarily need your eyesight for.
Yes, but he had to tell Charlie when to turn.
And he trusted him, right? So there's the respect and the trust thing. So again, back into the core values, the loyalty. Charlie was loyal to him. He was always by his side all the time, right? Always stood up for him, right? And now Frank was starting to do the same to help Charlie out with his episodes. So it's really like a set of 2 movies when you think of it. The scene itself at the end at the Beard School, I don't want to take all your time because I know that you're allotted for an hour, But the scene at the end really shows how Frank is going to give his wealth of knowledge about his experiences in life to Charlie, because it's kind of like he's paying him back for what he did for him. He saw him through this weekend, and he showed him that there is meaning in life and to still stay alive and not to take my own life, that kind of thing. So that was a really good message, right? That there's always something better, and don't feel bad about things, right? That they may look tough right now, but they're going to be better later on.
Right. I also thought the Ferrari scene was a good allegory to, well, maybe not allegory, but it was a good symbolism for like getting like a quick high, because when we see Frank, you know, in the driver's seat and he's driving, he says something like, well, like I'm a very happy man.
You're driving with one very happy man, Charlie.
So
that was the exact quote.
And so like you see him, like he's very excited, and when they get pulled over, he's able to, you know, talk his way out of a ticket. But then when we get out of that scene and we go to the next scene, so right before he tries to kill himself, he tells Charlie to go, like, I guess go a few blocks down to get some cigarettes.
Go a few blocks down and get some cigars and things, and ask him because I have a headache. And when he was down there, he says, that doesn't sound right. So like we said, his intuition, he went back to the hotel room, and that's when he was all dressed up in his
blues
colonel uniform and his blues, right? And he was going to do himself in. But Charlie, a big thing too that I think that Charlie learned is that Frank's dialogue with the police officer who was in the Coast Guard, right, was really, really good, because he was able to see that, you know, he has an elderly gentleman who is blind, but he sees things that he doesn't see, right, that Charlie can't see, and he knows how to work with things.
Right.
And it shows that Frank still wanted that part of his life back, was being in the military, because it was so important to him.
But yeah, so it's like Frank, he's really excited, like he's really like, he has this like emotional high when he's driving the car,
right.
And then the next day he's like just emotionally on the floor,
right.
And this is prior to when he changes his clothes,
right.
What that told me was that, you know, up till that point, Charlie had bonded enough with Frank to know that, okay, something's not right, which is why he went back to the
right.
room.
Exactly.
When it comes down to the wire and Frank is ready to kill himself, and Charlie like gets in his way, Frank points the gun at him, and he says, I don't know whether to shoot you or to adopt you.
Well, before that, the reason why he was doing that with him as well was that he says you're by singing or by telling on your friends, it's just like you're killing yourself internally, you know, with your soul, because you can never go back and relive that and replay that, right? I think that Charlie thought about that too, you know, and said, you know, if you're going to do that to yourself, you might as well do that to me, because you're saying that my life is over. And then that's when Frank says, no, you kind of thought, no, your life is not over. You're 17 years old, right? So you don't make it through Baird school, right? But you still have the rest of your life ahead of you. And it kind of made him think about his own life, and that he didn't want to go to kill himself. And so that was a great scene, because it showed how a youthful Charlie was helping an elderly guy, you know, with his problems, and vice versa. And he learned from Charlie.
I mean, I know I wouldn't be able to, you know, do what Charlie did. I guess maybe the wording kind of put me off a bit, because he says, well, you know, like if you're gonna shoot the both of us, then like you know, let's get on with it.
Right.
Because I mean, part of that kind of came off as a bluff, maybe, because obviously Charlie doesn't want to die. Well, because no, even Frank tells him, you don't really want to die.
And that's when he says, you don't either. And he says, why? He says, I'll give you, he says, give me one good reason why not. He says, I'll give you two. He says, you dance to tango and you drive a Ferrari like no one I've ever seen. He says, you haven't seen anyone do both. Yeah. You haven't seen anyone do either, he says.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like a comical thing at that point, right? And then he says, you're asking a a U.S. Army officer to
Relinquish his
bring
sidearm.
He says, no, just put it down for a while.
Yeah. Because
And
before
that
he
was-
just asked for the bullets.
Right, and he says that you have no place to negotiate. He says, I have a load of 45 and you got pimples.
Yes.
Right.
What he had that saved the both of them. Charlie used his words, and he used his prior knowledge of their time spent together.
Exactly. So they did all that. So now that piece is there. Now they're coming back to New Hampshire.
Right.
And on the ride back, what does Frank say to him? He says, why are you all alone in this, Charlie? I have that heavy feeling in the car.
Yes.
And then Charlie says to him, what's happening? And Frank was able to size it right up. Of course, George, right, Jr. must be a George
Willis Jr.
George Willis Jr. must be a George Willis Sr. out there.
Right.
And George Willis Sr. must have graduated from there. How'd you know all that? Charlie says to him. And he says, and I'm sure that George Willis Sr. is going to make it easier for George Willis Jr.
Right.
And you don't have anybody. That's when Charlie says no. So he brings him back to the campus.
Yep.
Manny, the driver, who started with them down in New York, because like you said, they took the flight down, so there was no limo driver then. But the limo driver from New York brought them back, and brought them back just in time enough for Charlie to get cleaned up and go to chapel, because they were going to be having this hearing on the Monday they came back from the Thanksgiving break. They got back a little bit earlier than when they had to be there at the meeting. Again, showing the loyalty, the duty, and the respect for Frank. Charlie was giving Manny the directions, because no GPS back then, right?
Yes, no GPS.
So he was giving him the directions, and he knows that Frank can't see, so he couldn't say take a left, take a right, So he was telling him how to go to proceed to bring Frank back. So right away, Frank knew that he was looking out for him, right, to get back safely and on a time and so on. And he says, we'll find it. And then before he left, he took his hand and he put to Charlie's face.
Yeah.
And he says, I want to feel you. If you need any recommendations, I'm your man. And then they closed the window.
I thought that part when Frank touches Charlie's face, like that was like their bonding moment had really reached a peak, because
Huge.
Because that's when Frank even though he's blind, that's when he really wanted to see Charlie, get a better
Yes,
idea
exactly.
of So
now the meeting.
Well,
now
actually,
the disciplinary meeting.
wait, hold on. I think there was one more. No, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
I would say it's the end of the beginning portion of the meeting. No, I remember what it was. At the beginning, so it's like the end of the first act, where Charlie is in Mr. Trask's office.
Yeah.
And the last thing he tells Charlie is that this involves the entire student body.
Right.
Even though it doesn't, but here we are. It involves the entire student body, which means there will be no classes, there will be no after-school activities until these proceedings have concluded.
And the situation is resolved.
Yes.
And the matter's resolved.
And if it's not, you will find yourself expelled. And I'm like, Mr. Trask is willing to embarrass, humiliate, and expel a student for the sake of his own ego?
Right, okay. So when the meeting, so now when they're starting off with the assembly, okay, you have, so here's the picture. You have about 10 or 11 people on the disciplinary board right here. We're right behind Mr. Trask. Mr. Trask is presiding over the proceedings as a headmaster, right? And you have the faculty down at the bottom, the rest of the student body that's dressed up in their suit jacket, necktie, in the audience. And you have George Willis Sr. and George Willis Jr. on the left-hand side, and Charlie all by himself on the right-hand side, as Mr. Trask is facing out. That's what you have.
Right.
Okay.
So
now they start with, the reason why we're having these proceedings is because of the situation that happened this Tuesday last. Right?
Yes.
Remember that? It happened right before going on to the Thanksgiving recess. And the incident that happened hits hard to our values of the school. He started going in how many people came from there, not how many people, but what roles these people now play in life that came from the Beard School.
Like presidents, CEOs,
coaches,
people who made
professional
businesses,
sports,
entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make it
the cradle of leadership. He was talking about that, and as they were and as they were talking about the cradle of leadership, the music changes, and you see Frank Slade appear from the bottom of the opening,
right,
to come in at the bottom of the balcony, right. So there's an opening right here. The balcony's up here. He comes through the opening, and Manny is
guiding him
up to the stage. Manny being the
driver,
the driver that they picked up in New York, or they picked up them in New York in the limousine. So he comes in with his nice suit on, Frank Slade, his glasses, the dark glasses, and the walking stick, right? And he comes up, and while Trask is still talking about why they're here and all this other stuff, Charlie grabs a chair and brings it over for Frank, to sit in. So in other words, a little subtle piece on that was, I'm coming up there whether you like it or not, is what Frank is telling Trask.
Okay.
Because he would normally say, do you mind if I come up here or whatnot, right? He didn't really care what he had to say, because what he had to say didn't really mean anything to Frank, because he knew that he was trying to put pressure on Charlie to sing like a bird, right? And tell what happened. And so that was a situation there. So that was a little quick piece of that I caught on that.
Oh, well, I didn't really focus on like that too much, because Mr. Trask only really asks Charlie who Frank is.
That was when he said that.
Until after Mr. Trask is done with his opening speech.
Well, he goes, who is this Mr. Sims? And he says, and then before he could get the words out, Al Pacino says, this is Mr. Frank Slade, Lieutenant Colonel retired.
And he says, and
what
once
is
again,
your affiliation with?
Yes, and then once again he lies about his affiliation. Says, I'm a friend of Mr. Sims' parents.
Yeah.
They could not make it to these proceedings today.
Yeah. No, he says el loco parentes.
Oh, okay.
He used the Latin for in place of parents, right? So in place of his parents, I'm here. And he goes, are we being sworn in today? Right? And then he says, we're all on our honor. There's no need to have a swearing on this, because we're all on our honor, Mr. Slade. And he goes, okay. He goes, happy to have you with us, Colonel. And then that's when they started into it.
Right.
So Trask started to question George Willis.
Yes.
About this, and they kind of went back and forth. George Willis, senior or junior, right? And then they show Frank Slade, and he was kind of like saying like that, because he knows that it's just a dog and pony show, right? Because of the way that they were doing it, right? And then he was making a mockery of the proceedings, not Mr. Sims, which Trask says that he was making a mockery,
right?
Because he was not being truthful with things.
And not only that, like the fact that Mr. Trask was like, oh, this is a, because he talks to George Willis Jr. and then he moves over to Charlie, and Charlie still doesn't give him an answer. And Mr. Trask is like, you were making a mockery of these proceedings, but I'm thinking like, these aren't even real proceedings, because if they were honest proceedings, then the person making the ruling wouldn't be, I think it's like with like police officers, or like they can't be involved on a case that they have a personal connection with. Mm-hmm. It's like Mr. Trask should not be the one presiding over all of this, since he is the one the victim. He's the one directly affected by what occurred. So he shouldn't be he should not have the position that he has. So you're right. It is not only is it a dog and pony show, but he's doing it to feed his ego.
Right.
Then we finally get to. I'll try and quote it as best I can. We're not going to do the whole speech, but I'll try to quote the opening bit with Mr. Trask. He says,
Mr. Sims,
yeah,
you don't have problems with your eyesight, do you?
No. And then...
No, you don't wear glasses, do you? And because George was saying that he didn't really see who it was.
Because he didn't have his contacts.
And why don't you ask Charlie? He was in a better position to see than me. And then he goes, Mr. Sims. And he goes, yes. "You don't have problems with your eyesight, do you?" And he goes, "No, sir. With your untrammeled sight, whom did you see outside my office?" And he says, "I saw someone." "Good, you saw someone. Was it their size and shape?" There was a size and shape of any most, back and forth. There was a size and shape of any most bared student, sir. And that's when he got really upset. And Frank went to go pat him on the arm like this. But before that, well, like I said, we're not going to quote the whole exchange on it, but Frank was saying that this is such a crock of crap, okay, the way that it was being done.
Right.
Because the only person in this act with any kind of
like integrity.
Of integrity and character sitting right next to me right here. And he says, "This boy's soul is intact."
Yes.
How do you know? Someone here, I'm not trying to say who, tried to buy it. Only Charlie here wasn't selling. And that's when Mr. Trask put him down to try to put him out of order.
So.
But anyway, so I'm getting ahead of the game.
But like slightly before he said, so Mr. Trask is like, I'm not gonna, who was it? It was like, I'm not gonna punish Harry, Jimmy, and Trent, and I'm not gonna punish Mr. Willis. I'm going to advise the disciplinary committee that you be expelled, Mr. Sims. You are a cover-up artist, and you are a liar.
Right.
And then
that's when he started in with, but not a snitch, and that's when he said what I said. Right.
Right. So not only that.
I'll give you one more chance, Mr. Sims, to say Mr. Sims doesn't need it.
Oh yeah, like
Mr.
Sims, I'll give you one final opportunity to speak up. Mr. Sims doesn't want it. But the part where he said, well, okay, so like the opening line with Mr. Slade, he says, "But not a snitch." And then right. Because there's a part that I really wanted to get into real quick. So Mr. Trask is like, "Excuse me? No, I don't think I will." And then the next line that Mr. Trask says, "Mr. Slade," and
yes.
that very line right there, you see Mr. Trask, like his demeanor, like the way he says Mr. Slade. This is the sound of a broken man, and this is before Mr. Slade goes into his whole like speech. You know
right.
why? Because not only is the proceedings a dog and pony show, Mr. Trask himself is a dog and pony show.
Right.
Because you can tell that he's only holding back because the entire student body and the disciplinary committee have their eyes on him and everything else. But he can't exactly, he doesn't want his reputation to be tarnished if he, really expresses himself. It's like he's just holding on to that last sense of like decorum.
When he said not a snitch, that's when he said, "I'll give you one more chance, Mr. Sims, to say," and that's when he says he doesn't need it, this, that, and the other. And then he says, "Are you done, Mr. Slade?" He goes, "No, I'm just getting warmed up."
Yes.
Right.
And so, Mr. Slade, he goes through his entire speech and
right.
calls the whole thing a sham, and that, whatever integrity that used to be here at the Baird School it's gone. As he says, "You're building a rat ship here, a vessel for seagoing snitches."
Yeah.
And
to have boys go informing other people and to save their hide.
Yeah, and then it's like, what was it? It was the Mr. Slade says,
When I came
what is
here,
your motto? What is your motto here? "Boys, inform on your classmates, save your hide. Anything short of that, we're going to burn you at the stake." And I thought to myself, because you showed us that scene so many times, I thought it should have he should have aptly said, "Boys, inform on your classmates and get a full ride scholarship to Harvard," or something
right,
like that,
right.
Because it's
that's what he was doing actually.
Yeah.
Right, was to put the threat there. But then the big thing was that Frank Slade was trying to show that, talking about when he came in, again, trying to use Trask's own words about the cradle of leadership. When the bow breaks, the cradle will fall, and the cradle has fallen.
Right.
Makers of men, makers of leaders, right? Be careful with what kind of leaders you're producing here. And that's a big piece back with the core values piece, right? Because these core values are non-negotiable, right? No matter what, you should always stay by those core values that you go to live by. And that's what Slade was trying to tell them, to try and tell the audience, to try and tell everybody that Charlie he's the embodiment of those core values, of respect, of character, of integrity, all these things that he was talking about. And he was trying to show that he was being talked down to by Trask.
Right.
So that's why he said, I've been around, and he's seen boys like these, younger than these, with their arms ripped off, right?
Their arms torn out, their legs ripped off.
Right, because he saw that in Vietnam, right?
And there's nothing like a sight of an amputated spirit.
Right.
And just as...
so his spirit was amputated until Charlie helped him, right?
Right.
That's the tie-in there. And now you're doing the same thing to Charlie here by sending him back to Oregon with his tail between his legs.
But
right?
what you're really doing is amputating his soul.
His soul, right, exactly.
And why? Because he's not a bad man.
And then he's talking about the crossroads. He says that
Yes.
Charlie's coming to the crossroads. Does he go down the path of this, or does he go down the path that he wants to go down, and that's of integrity and courage, right? And these are the things that leadership should be made of,
Right.
And he goes to plea to the committee, because now Trask is nothing now, right? Because now the committee is going to make the decision.
Right.
So he pleads with the committee to let him continue on his journey. It's going to be a great journey. I know it. It's going to be nurture it and go to protect it.
Yes.
It's going to make you proud someday. And that's when he sat down.
Yes.
And he had a standing ovation for what he said.
So the disciplinary committee doesn't need a lot of time to come to a decision. Obviously Charlie, he's excused from the whole thing.
He's excused from all the matter, but before that, Mrs. Hunsaker said she reported out because she was the chairperson of it, and she was the librarian that saw the incident happen, and she knew that Charlie wasn't there because he was with her, closing up, because he was working there as part of his student work, right? His work study, work there in the library. So she knew that he wasn't involved with it. So she knew that, but they had to go through these proceedings, right? And then they said that Mr. Havermeyer, that was Harry, Jimmy, Trent, right?
Yes.
They didn't get, they were on suspicion of ungentlemanly conduct.
Yes.
And Charles Sims,
George Willis, he wasn't going to give any
recognition
or commendation
yes,
for his
he will not get any
cooperation.
recognition or commendation for that. So in other words, to say that he's nothing, right, in their regard in this matter, because he didn't really offer anything, right?
Right.
And he was just as complicit with it as they were, because they were the ones who were doing it. And then Mr. Sims is exempt from any further, response to this incident.
And so this.
Excused.
Yeah. So this is okay. So if I know there's a little bit left of the story after this, but one part I kind of wanted to point out that, like, I do like the movie as a whole, but if there was one point that didn't make sense to me, was that, like, it kind of makes sense as a screenwriter to, like, hit the nail on the head, but after we hear that Charlie is excused from the whole thing, Mr. Slade is like, hooah! And then the entire room is like cheers.
That's what Army folks say when something goes well. They give that cheer.
But my thought was, what are all these students cheering for?
They're cheering because Charlie was found innocent.
Yes, but at first I was like, what did they secretly did they all secretly have his back at behind the scenes?
Well, they all knew that these guys, because the way that Mr. Slade laid it all out, that they knew that he was right, that Charlie didn't have anything to do with this, and that Trask was trying to put pressure onto them, and who knows, maybe he was trying to put pressure on these other students for other matters that we don't even know in the movie, right? But prior to, or even during, who knows, right? Maybe they were trying to call other people in. But because of the performance that Frank Slade gave in his speech that he had, it was so, it struck a nerve with these kids, because they went to that school because they had those core values, right? There, of integrity and character. And they were trying to tear it down. So they liked Charlie because he was like them. Maybe those kids got picked on or whatever it was because they didn't come for money.
Right.
Maybe there'd be some scholarship kids there, and he was their leader. Because again, the leader is being able to make other people around you better. That's what leadership is, right? Many people say it's doing what's right, when no one's watching. That's true, that's all part of it. But the basic piece is being able to, having that ability to make other people around you better. And Charlie was able to do that because maybe he had them on the football team. Maybe he had them on a tutoring session that he was helping them with. So those types of things.
So I mean, like emotionally, it's like, it's nice. It's like, it's like, it's really like it's just like everyone, like it's just like emulating what everyone is thinking. Oh, like, yes, thank you. Like, Charlie isn't gonna get punished for this.
And
I guess just from a narrative standpoint, for
right.
me, it was like, why are these boys cheering?
Well, the ones that they showed cheering was right behind Charlie. They were much younger. They were like maybe 13, 14 years old that you saw that were cheering. Although the whole group was cheering, but Charlie was almost 18 years old.
Right.
So it made sense. And they were looking to him for leadership, right?
So right after that, Charlie and Frank are, they leave leaving the campus, and then this one of the members of the disciplinary committee,
Ms. Downs.
She runs after them, and she talks to Frank for a moment, and
Frank guessed the scent of her perfume, and she says that's right.
And so she teaches like political science
Yes.
at the school, and she said, I think it was something to the effect of that she wanted to get to know what his political stance.
Yeah, because she said, thank you for coming here today. I would love to talk to you about politics and to learn about different. That's when Charlie jumped in and said he was on Johnson's staff.
Yeah, and she gets really impressed by that.
And she gets really impressed by it, right? And that's when Frank told Charlie, don't tell me. Auburn hair, blue eyes, green eyes, right? 5 foot, whatever. He gave her height and everything.
Yeah.
So, and he says yes. And then that's how, so that showed people, well, the viewers, that he was trying to have a relationship with her afterwards, maybe.
Right. And then when Frank, Charlie, and the driver get back to Frank's home, well, his niece's house, he goes up to, I guess, his grandkids.
No, that would be the second niece in nephews, because that was his niece.
Right. Oh, okay.
So the grandniece or.
So, and you can see that over the course of the weekend, his demeanor has changed. He's a lot more like
happier.
Happier, gentle, like
wants
to actually wants to spend time with them.
A lot more happy. He's happier with things, and also too that he said to Charlie when Charlie got him back on the car, "I can always count on you, Charlie." And that's how they kind of ended it.
And then I think the last thing, like, it's never mentioned, because like the very last thing is like Charlie is in the he's in the limousine, and I guess the driver takes him back to campus.
No, they was already back to campus.
No, but I mean, like,
but when it ended.
Right, but no, because like Charlie, like, he waits by the door of the limousine, and so so obviously he's getting taken back to campus. Yes. So, and then they roll as the car drives off over the hill. We roll credits. But the one thing that never gets, I don't think it was ever brought up, but it's very blatant that, well, isn't Mr. Slade like a widower? Or he's not married to what
he's not married. He never, in the movie, he never got, from what I understood, he never got married, and he never had children.
Okay.
But he wished that he was able to to settle down. That's the underlying piece, that he likes the fact, he wishes that he had what his niece has.
Okay.
The family and stuff, but he kind of fills the role of a grandfather, even though he's their uncle.
So
he's her uncle and their great uncle.
Because like at first I thought he was his niece's father. Like at first, because she keeps saying, "Oh, like he's a lump of sugar," and I'm like,
No. The guy that they went to go visit for dinner, surprisingly, as a surprise,
yes,
was the Was
the
the father
niece's
of the
father.
of the niece. Yeah,
Okay. And who is Frank's older brother?
Frank's older brother.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. That's all I really wanted to
Yeah.
like regarding his marital status, because
Right.
especially for someone who, because one thing I always thought of for someone who speaks, who speaks so with so much reverence and respect about women, I'm like, well, what? Wouldn't you would have thought that he either would have been married or would have sought out a relationship, or like a long-term relationship.
You know, like during the movie too, you learn about all these different escapades that they had with women, right?
Right.
But he didn't have any one that he could really go to settle down with, and that's what the end of the movie kind of shows, that he has Miss Downs, right? She liked him for what he had to say, and she liked his character and integrity, because he came to support Charlie. And that's how in the movie, you kind of extrapolate that's where they're now going to have a relationship now, Frank and her.
Well, Mr.
go.
Tulli, I don't know, is there anything else about the movie you wanted to talk about? I think we've covered just about everything.
No, I think we covered a lot of things. A lot of people can learn a lot of things about life with that movie. Again, I know it's a fictional movie. It's not nonfiction. It's not based on real life, but it could be. Who knows? I mean, it could be a person that is being taken care of or being cared for by a younger man, right? And an older man is trying to show him the way into adulthood to become a gentleman. So I thought it was a very good movie.
And that's why you made us watch that final speech before every single football and basketball game.
And I would also go through, just for the record, I would go to turn down the volume so they couldn't hear the expletives.
Swear words.
So they couldn't hear the expletives.
Yes.
But the whole reason why I would have you watch those pieces about the leadership is because, like in my classroom and like I do with my clubs and so on, I want people to understand about how core values can be followed and implemented in one's life. Whether you go into the military, you go into business, you go into school, you go into whatever, film industry, right? You have a set of core values and a moral compass.
Right.
That you have. And that's the whole idea of that.
Well,
and that's a good movie to show that.
Right. Well, Mr. Tulli, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Like, it was a lot of fun actually sitting down and talking to you, thoroughly about the entire plot of this movie, because you bring it up, well, you quote it all the time. And so
it's been an honor to be here too as well. And if we're talking about a series of movies, talking about leadership stuff and accountability and responsibility, Blue Chips could be another one that we should watch.
Okay.
That we should talk about, starring Nick Nolte.
Hi, I hope you liked this episode of the Production House Podcast. Special thank you to Acton TV for use of their studio located in Acton, Massachusetts. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and Rumble, listen on Spotify, and we ask that you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I'll see you next time.